Good day and welcome to the Kumu segment of the Systems Thinking Certification Program. In terms of why I added the Kumu segment as part of the program itself is that I've currently sort of distilled the essence of systems thinking down to the investigation of relationships and their implications. For all of the myriad of definitions that people have about what systems thinking is, that seems to be the essence of all of them. And Kumu, to my way of thinking at the moment, is the best thing I've found to date to develop relationship maps to help one understand what all the relevant relationships are that come into play when attempting to understand a situation. And while Kumu wasn't intended to support the learning environment that I created herein, if it wasn't for Kumu, I'd still be looking for a software package to build this in. I only attempted to build it in 8 or 10 different software environments before this. And finally, when Kumu showed up, my search was over. I'm currently not looking. I'm quite pleased with the environment. But what I like about it is that while it is an extremely deep application in terms of capability, one can become productive in the Kumu environment in about 5 minutes. The simplest dimension in terms of what you need to know, and don't pay attention to this diagram. All you have to do is add an element, call it something, and add another element. No. 2. All right, come on. I'll call it 4. All right, so I've created 2 elements. I select one, tell it I want to add a connection, and I tell it I want to connect to 1, and I've got a connection. I can go through that set of steps repeatedly, and I can build a relationship map that is truly a network-oriented relationship map, as opposed to mind maps, which are essentially flattened, laid out hierarchical structures because they all begin at the middle and fan out from the center. In a Kumu structure, you can build a hierarchical map if you want to, though it's not at all necessary. It's simply a set of elements with relationships between them, and you can then elaborate on that almost endlessly in terms of the way that you structure the map itself, the way that you develop a perspective to define the style of the map itself, the way that you apply information to the elements that you create. And not only does it allow you to add information about the elements, you get to define types and tags, and you can define all of your own attributes if you so wish. And I think Jeff will show some of that when he talks more about Kumu. And while most things allow you to provide information about the elements, Kumu also allows you to do the same kinds of things with regard to the relationships themselves, so that not only can you depict the relationship, you can define descriptions associated with the relationships and label them however you so choose. And if you care to, you can annotate them in one way or another so that you can build causal loop diagrams quite readily. Here is one that I built just before this session in terms of here's a balancing loop with a fail structure, a reinforcing loop that impedes the progress, and if it in fact takes a long time to move towards the goal, the discouragement results and it tends to cause the goal to drift, so that you have another balancing structure which is a drift. And so I mean, it's just extremely easy to build structures in Kumu so that while Insight Maker, you can develop rich pictures in causal loop diagrams and do simulation modeling. Insight Maker was initially designed to be a simulation environment. It was the interactions between Scott and I that loosened up a number of the requirements that actually enabled it to develop numerous other types of diagrams. Kumu is simply well suited for developing relationship diagrams, relationship maps, with all types of elaboration, which is why I thought, I mean, if this is a program about systems thinking, and systems thinking is all about the investigation of relationships and their implications, then you should become acquainted with what seems to be one of the most fluid environments for developing, investigating relationships that I've come across to date. So that's why it's here. And since Jeff and I have not coordinated what it was that we were going to present, if I spend a lot of time talking about Kumu in any detail, I'm apt to run over his presentation. So that if it's okay with Jeff, I think I'm going to let him actually begin sooner than he intended. Let me ask him if that's actually okay. Where is he, Jeff?
Hey, Gene, can you hear me?
Yes. Are you?
Perfect.
Okay. So is it okay if you start very early?
It is great, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. So I think it's a perfect place to get started into some of the quality of life maps.
Okay, so I gave you control of my screen, and all of the URLs that you sent me are here on tabs in the same order that you sent them to me. So
okay.
So
wonderful.
As an introduction, this is Jeff Mohr, the president of Kumu Systems, half of the dynamic duo of Jeff and Ryan Mohr. Ryan, I understand Ryan does all the mystical magic in the background, and you are the sort of the face of Kumu in terms of developing the requirements. And
he does all the hard work, and I get to be the one that gets to go take all the credit for it. So.
Oh, okay.
So let me start. Would love just to give a bit of background on kind of Kumu and where it came from. The way to think about it, Kumu's been around kind of from an idea stage for about the past 3 years or so, and we really set out to build a tool more around our involvement in some of the social impact and philanthropy space. So I worked for the founders of eBay, their family office, and what we kept seeing was kind of how easy it is to spend a lot of money trying to improve some of these really tough social issues, but how easy it is to not actually make a lasting difference. And what we kept coming back to was this idea of relationships being really key. We actually started first really trying to solve that challenge of how do you map relationships among people and really understand the social networks that are at play to be able to identify key influencers, work with them to actually get policies changed, and from there realize that, hey, it's not just about the people, right? This whole idea of doing systems mapping, understanding both the relationships among people and also among all these different factors that are at play in a given situation was really, really important. And what we kept running into was this idea that people were doing kind of one or the other, but we wanted to try to create an environment where you could marry the two, where you could have this view of what are the people in your network, how are they connected, who might be influential, how might you reach them, and also how do you really understand like what you're going to reach them for, like what is that lever that you're going to try to push them to be able to support. And so that's really where Kumu has, I would say, continues to be headed. It's very much a work in progress. You have Gene to thank for a number of the features that I'll walk through today, because he continues to drive us and let us know what needs to be added and what isn't good enough yet. So it's been a wonderful relationship. So let me switch. I'm going to walk through first the Hawaii Quality of Life map. I'll give a little bit of background here, and why I want to walk through this one is it's a great example of kind of a systems map that uses some of the power of Kumu, and from there we'll show you some of the other different use cases, but since this is the Systems Thinking certification course, wanted to start here. So quick background, I'm going to walk through a couple maps that are within this project, and the way to think about what this project is about was Hawaii Business Magazine every few years puts out a report which is essentially infographics about the quality of life in Hawaii. More statistical, how are things doing, how have the numbers changed over time. This past year, we worked with them. When I say we, it's the Midyar group. They actually coordinated with Hawaii Business Magazine and said, hey, how can we actually change the conversation to be less just around how are those numbers doing, but how can we actually have people start thinking about what's really causing that? What are those systemic relationships underneath all of that? And can we actually get policymakers, people within the business community to actually be thinking in this way that's a bit more systemic? And so what you see here, this is kind of the simplest of the maps. They created a couple different types of maps. This is really just an easy relationship map of saying what are some of these connections within civic engagement that are causing things to happen. You'll see there are essentially some loops, but there's not actually any loops noted. We'll get into that in a later map. But the way to think about Kumu, and you've had a lot of experience with this, seeing it with Gene's course, but this idea of the right side is the map, and the left side is really where you can put the narrative. And that was really important to us, where this idea of how do you do storytelling really well, how do you engage people both in a visual way and also in this narrative way to hook them into the basically the challenges at hand. And what you'll see, and you'll see a couple different tweaks throughout this, is that there's these dotted underlined links on the left. Those are meant to actually link the narrative that you have into the map. So if you think about a systems map getting more and more complex and you have a couple paragraphs of text, it can be really easy to get lost about what I'm talking about, and is what I'm talking about in the upper right corner of your map, is it in the bottom left corner of your map, and these links are really meant to help with that. And so what you'll see if I hover on civic engagement, I'll actually be taken to that part of the map. So if I say diverse voices, that's zooming me into that part of the map and kind of highlighting what's immediately connected to that. And I can do that for any of these other items. And if I click, it'll actually take me into that profile for that element. And one of the things you'll notice, this map, it's somewhat built out. They didn't build out definitions for every single element in this map. Ideally, there'd be some explanation of what does use of Band-Aid solutions mean. It's a little bit self-explanatory, but ideally you'd be having a definition, maybe including some information or examples or links to other data, and really using this profile to house all of that information. So let me switch and I'll show you another map. Give me 1 second. There we go. So in this map, you'll see this one's a little bit more in depth. And again, they did these different styles to really give people an easy entry point into this type of map, but then still get to what they thought was the complexity needed to really map out all the different dynamics. And as Gene showed you, you can actually have this idea of loops as well. So within Kumu, you can actually create what we call these circles or elements. The lines are the connections. And then this loop is a grouping of different connections. And so what's nice is you can also click on the loop, and the loop has its own profile. So we can see here on the left it now changed. It's talking about, this is actually a balancing loop about aloha. And it talks about how Hawaii has inherited and nurtured a culture of aloha that reduces the potential for destructive conflict and supports tolerance. And so it was, again, really important that we didn't just allow the ability to have a loop, but people wanted to say, like, hey, I want to talk about what's going on. I want to show you that this loop over here, R5, which ends up being pretty kind of convoluted in terms of all the different things it connects to, this is all about self-expectations. And how can I just talk to someone about what that dynamic is that's really being driven? One of the other things, too, for us was just this idea of, and how do you make this a little bit easier to approach? And so the idea of what I just did there, I clicked and held on the R5 label, and that's just focusing in and just showing you the pieces that are within that loop. You'll see R1 is included as well. Since these two items are also part of R5, it ends up including any other connections you need. But it just makes it nice to be able to kind of zoom into this picture and not be overwhelmed by that entire map. If anyone else has had the experience of putting a systems map up in an entire room and having people's eyes glaze over, part of our continual challenge with Kumu is to say, how can we avoid that from happening? How can we allow people to walk out step by step and really see this whole map unfold? Finally, I'm going to switch and show you one overall map because we'll give a quick example of how kind of you can use qualitative values to do some coloring and sizing of the map. In this one, and you'll have to forgive me, if you look at this, it's a little bit, I think, too pessimistic of an outlook in here, but what's meant to happen is this is essentially the highest level map of maps. So this map actually, if I zoom in so you can see, has each of those blue circles is actually a link back to a loop on another map. So if I click on intergroup agility, you'll see there's this link at the bottom that actually takes me to the loop inside the social and cultural map. I won't click it right now, but if you want to go and explore this project is completely public, so you can poke around and kind of play with it as much as you'd like. But that actually links back to a whole set of elements and connections which form a loop. And then each of these red connections here in the map is meant to show that overall right now, how those loops are interplaying are hindering quality of life. If I zoom back out, you'll see there's a couple ones up in the top left corner which are helping quality of life, and then there's a few which are just basically agnostic in that they're not helping or hurting quality of life over here on this right-hand side. And so the way that those are all stored is if I click on this connection, we just use the tag that says hinder. And so basically what Kumu lets you do is actually set up a decoration which says, hey, anytime that there's this tag hinder, I want to color that connection red. And so you can see it gives you a lot of flexibility where you can store little short pieces of information like this and actually change the look and feel of the map to really have some of that data pop. Gene, how would you like to handle kind of questions throughout? I'm happy to stop at any point and take questions. I'm happy to continue working through a couple different examples, but let me know how you've handled it in the past.
Yeah, if they post questions, I will review them and I will interrupt you wherever appropriate to ask the questions. There aren't any at the moment yet.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So that's a quick overview on some of the systems mapping. Let me show you another example, and this is kind of a common example we'll use around the PayPal Mafia. So for people who aren't familiar, PayPal Mafia is this group of people who were with PayPal basically as it got acquired by eBay, who have gone off to start this amazing array of other companies in Silicon Valley. Why I use the example, I really wanted to walk through this idea of the profile and what you can use it for in terms of storing information. So if I click on Reid Hoffman, you'll see on the left, it can really be used to store a bio about a person. And that's what that top part is this description. Most times that's a bio, gives other background. You'll see within Gene uses it well in terms of including links to videos, embedding videos within that page, embedding images, but it really is that spot for the narrative. As you look down, this first part is the tags, and so we have things like PayPal Mafia, venture capital, tech, and so those again are just short, think of them as unlabeled attributes. It's where you have a value that is almost in and of itself enough, versus if you look somewhere down here like net worth, if we just put 4.4 as a tag, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. It needs to have this label that, hey, that is the net worth. And so this whole next section is all of those attributes. And so you'll see you can create these to be whatever you want. It comes blank, but we can store things like net worth, education, where are people from. You could do influence. So we have a lot of folks who are mapping kind of who's high, medium, and low influence to be able to better showcase like who they should rely on within a network. And as you look down, you can even do things like links out to attribution, board affiliations, and so there's a lot of flexibility there. And what we've really made Kumu to do is make it easy to pull this information and use it for decorations on the map. So if you look on the right-hand side, each of these circles that are the people are actually scaled based on net worth. So Reid Hoffman is 4.4 billion. If I click on Elon, you'll see he's a longer bio. And at the bottom, his net worth is 6.7 billion. And so we can actually come in and tell Kumu, hey, size all people based on net worth, and then we'll automatically change the sizing of those circles so that that data set actually pops out visually. And so that provides like a lot of kind of great features. People can use it for something like net worth. We've seen people do kind of a similar version but with a color scale for percent complete. So if you think about if you're tracking relationships within a project and how different steps are related to each other, you could store percent complete on this left-hand side, use a color scale, and then have dark green be 100% complete and have white be 0% complete, and that'll actually let you see this visual picture of progress and anywhere things may have fallen behind. And especially if you add in a tag about something's critical or something's behind schedule, and you can color it bright red because of that, it makes it so you can get this really quick picture of where are some of the different bottlenecks in this kind of relational project map that you have.
Jeff?
Yes.
Yeah. Edith asked a question about a step-by-step set of instructions on how to create a causative diagram. And there is a video that's already been created by Jeff that's in the Kumu help file, and I will post a direct link to that with this video in the System Thinking Certification Program stuff at the end. So,
okay,
all right, Edith.
Perfect. And I'm happy to just show the help site really quick. So as I'm walking through, if people are wanting to look for a bit of additional information, so the way to find that is help.kumu.io. And so that's really where we'll post all the tutorials. It's always being built out. So the Causative diagram overview is probably recent in the past week, I think, which may be why you didn't see it before, Edith. And so if you scroll down, you'll see we have the basics, which are a couple just different simple guides about getting started. As you scroll down farther, we have the use cases. So there's a systems mapping, a network analysis, and then guides below that. And so spend a bit of time poking around here. This is where the map is actually, the video is actually embedded, is on the systems mapping use case page. And so you can watch it right in here. Excuse me. And as you scroll down, we'll walk through the actual steps kind of in a written format that are pretty similar to what the video walks through. So that relationship map gives you a kind of a quick example and an intro to some of the ways that people are using Kumu is this idea of almost like an infographic style of how do we share, how do we showcase relationships that are important, oftentimes in kind of a media or a journalistic type approach. In this example, this is one that actually the New York Times did. It was not done in Kumu originally. We actually recreated it in Kumu to make sure that we could kind of showcase the same type of map, but it's this idea of looking at the debt crisis that went on in Europe. And what you see here is the connections are actually related to amount owed. And so if I click on the connection between the United States and Germany, you'll see there's this attribute which is the amount owed, 324 billion, and then there's a worrisome attribute. And so the worrisome is a bit more qualitative, and then the amount owed is the quantitative. And so what we're doing here in this map is actually sizing the connection based on the amount owed, and then we're coloring the connection based on that worrisome level. And so this whole idea of Greece being kind of the highest risk, and then it goes down from there. Spain, I think, is one of the medium risks. France is low, and then everything else was a limited risk. But you can get to see this picture of both what are all those kind of obligation connections between each of these different countries, and then who has the biggest amount owed. And so obviously that's going to be United States to China. And then if I click on the country itself, you can see the GDP. And so each of the circles for the countries are actually sized by GDP and again colored by that worrisome level. And so it just provides a nice way to make this interactive. Again, ideally, if you clicked on the United States, you could have a profile about what's going on there, especially the connection between United States and China. You could imagine a narrative about kind of why that's so large, what that dynamic has been over time, but making sure it's easy to have an interactive map like this. And one of the unique things about Kumu is normally a map like this would take someone who had a lot of technical skill and would actually have to write code to be able to create a map that was interactive in this way. And with Kumu, you can actually just create this by hand, use an add element, decorate buttons, and then easily share it, post it on another website. So we're really hoping to kind of democratize the process by which these are created. So some other quick fun examples. So if you watch the Rob Ford examples at all from the Toronto mayor who got into trouble, he was actually, that came out right when Kumu's ability to do this storytelling popped out. And there's a handful of maps that people have done around Rob Ford, but it just gives you, again, a better sense of how people are using it for the investigative journalism side to say, like, let's show some of these relationships that are really at the core of corruption and show whether it's who you're connected to, a company that you work for that might give you a conflict of interest, and do that in a way that can be visual, people can click on, people can read more about, and so just really giving you the power to make that a picture that's easy to create. And it wouldn't be complete without some fun images. This was one we did for the Academy Awards, which is how to visualize the people who were up for each of the different awards and which of the motion pictures were kind of most central in terms of being up for the highest number of awards. And you've seen some of this through Gene already, but this idea of being able to embed videos in the sidebar, you can actually do that. You can click to be able to have this start playing. And the goal here is, again, how do we make that narrative more engaging, especially with a systems map? If you're trying to have someone understand a dynamic that's going on and you already have someone in the community who is talking about that, or you've recorded your own video explaining and walking through the dynamics in a map, you could actually embed that within Kumu as well. And so again, just that whole goal of how do we engage people emotionally, how do we grab their attention, and then use that to be able to pull them along and get them kind of bought in and really understanding the forces that are at play within the system being a factor in making us way more effective in solving these problems. So one other example I wanted to share is this idea of being able to do that network mapping human side of things. What's the relationships between people? This is actually kind of a live example of a group of about 120 people who came together in Colorado around something called Collective Impact. But what they did was they all filled out a survey. That survey asked a number of different questions. I'll click on someone so you can see a sample profile. But it's a quick bio, which initiatives they're a part of, what the geographic focus is of those initiatives, and things like, what do you have experience with? This was really getting at an idea of how can we help people matchmake at a conference? How can we help link people in terms of, I have this skill, you need this skill, how can we connect people together across those items so we can have the shared learning? And then even issue areas and outcome focus, organizations. And so what's nice is you can put this information into Kumu. That's helpful if you're clicking around and reading. But it becomes a lot more helpful if you can see these natural interconnections based on things like the initiative or the geographic focus. And so we've added that in Kumu by something called clustering. And so if you look at the bottom toolbar, a lot of kind of the core features that you're using to toggle on and off live down here in this bar. And so if I click cluster, you'll see I get a new pane that lets me pick which attributes I want to use to cluster by. So I'm going to click Collective Impact-ish Initiative. And so the way to think about this is what this has now done is this is essentially taking the information that's in the profile and it's drawn it as an element on the map and created connections from anyone who had that value. So let me zoom in here. So you'll see Colorado 9 to 25. That's the one that I'm kind of right around. Everyone who's around that has that value in the profile, but you start to get to see these links that, oh, interesting, the person on Colorado 9 to 25 is also on Lake County Youth Master Plan. This person's also on both. I wonder if those two people meet, or those two people know each other. They in fact do. You can toggle something else on like geographic focus and start to see the overlap of both like the initiative and also the geography that people work in. And it's just a way to almost do kind of a visual query of saying like what are those possible connections, what should we look at, who should we maybe try to make an introduction between, who is clustering around this idea of like skills that people have or skills that people need, and just being able to see this in a very visual way. This is a great kind of shortcut in terms of creating a network map where the way to think about it is if we untoggle both of these, I can just click organization, and so now we have this picture of everyone connected to the organization they work with. If I was actually signed in right now, I could choose to save this information as like a permanent structure on my map, and so this saves you the time of having to create a data set that has explicit from-to relationships. So this map, think about this data is just imported directly from an Excel spreadsheet, and it just says like your name, your organization, your impact initiative, and so you can import that into Kumu, do some quick clustering and save it, and you now have this like very kind of built-out network style structure within your data. So, Gene, I'm going to pause here, and we can do any more questions too, or if you want to kind of bounce back and forth and elaborate more on any of the pieces that kind of you wanted to make sure that we touch on, and then if we have time later, I'm happy to kind of step back and go through some of the building steps as well within Kumu.
At this point, there's only one more question. Well, Edith says it's amazing. I think it's amazing too. Gerd wants to know if there's an offline version of this.
So there's not
a desktop version.
So there's not right now. The way to think about it, so the way Kumu works, as you download the map, once you download it, you're good to go unless you save something. So if you're worried about like internet cutting out occasionally, not being able to have my map, like click on something, have it come up, that is available. We don't have an actual full offline version yet. There may be one in the works later on. There may also be kind of a desktop version, meaning outside of your browser, just so you can get a little bit more power out of it. But for now, it's just primarily the web-based application.
I would think that if the intent is to promote collaboration, online is pretty much essential.
Right.
If you want multiple people, in other words, something that I don't know if I want to go there already.
Go for it.
Where is this? This was an initiative that was started on Saturday, sort of unexpectedly based upon a conversation I was having with someone in the UK. And we've been having real problems with LinkedIn as of late because it's essentially broken in terms of being able to read the posts that people make and determine whether or not you want to respond to them. So the question was, could we in fact develop a construct that would allow people, would provide us an alternative to using LinkedIn for doing discussions? So I threw this together with several pieces, several segments, one being all of the systems thinking related organizations that I knew about, and one being a number of companies that I knew about that were active in the arena. Another segment being all of the models and methods that propose to embrace the systemic paradigm, and then a whole bunch of maps or Kumu projects that I'm aware of, and another segment for discussions, and another segment that I think seems to be appropriate for insight maker models, where the intent is, one, if someone simply wanted to have a systems related discussion, we could come here and simply create a discussion and have a discussion in the discussion space the same way that you have been submitting comments and interacting on the discussions in the systems thinking certification program. And then if someone actually wanted to build an insight maker model and then use this environment to conduct a discussion and use the perspectives from the discussion to enhance the model over time, or simply as a place to build out a set of related Kumu projects which probably have their own discussions in them. In other words, there's a number of these Kumu projects actually have their own discussions, and what's so I mean, this has only been in existence for 2.5 days now, so or 3.5 days, something like that. But what seems to be making sense is building out the projects piece similar to the way that this is put together, so that people could come in and do their own clustering to figure out which Kumu projects are ongoing in areas that they're interested in, and they could then go ahead and determine if they wanted to participate in those projects. So it's sort of the construction of a cooperative, collaborative environment, while the discussion portion of this is essentially the same thing as LinkedIn. It's got all this other capability wrapped around it that's just sort of rather fascinating, and we're at this point simply trying to figure out what we can do with it and what it makes sense to do. So, sorry, when this idea showed up on Saturday afternoon, I sent Jeff a text and an email and tried to get him by cell phone, and I was flying. So we're and all of the maps that Jeff touched upon and this one, I will post all of these links with the video in the Kumu segment in the certification program map. But so it's just that's the part that I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, and I think touching on the discussions, most people have seen discussions because it's such an integral part of the course, but I can touch on our kind of vision there just for a little bit, and this idea of, like, the map is one way of engaging people, and it's a really important way, but like, how do we make sure that we can house all the really important conversations that go on related to a map? And a lot of times those are going to happen within a room. We don't expect all of those to end up in Kumu, but especially those conversations that are going on in email right now, that are going on between two people, hashing out why something's connected, or hey, I have an issue about like this part of the map, and like I want to make that point known, and I want to have a back and forth. We felt Kumu was really missing out by not having a way to contain all of that in one environment, and even have that history of like if we're 6 months down the road and when that comes up again, we have to go back and dig through email about why we made the connection that we did. The fact that you can now have it within these discussions makes it just a lot more powerful, and I think a lot more rich overall. So those you'll see that they'll continue to be integrated further and further within the maps, and allow people to even like reference elements and loops with them. But this is kind of the first step towards that vision.
And part of, I mean, it looks like a typical threaded discussion, though you can actually edit posts, which is highly unusual for most environments after they're done for a while, and which gives me the idea that you could actually distill a discussion down by, just synthesizing it. And the fact that you can reference, if you notice it on the bottom, you can actually reference this particular post in this thread, and you can put a link to that post someplace else in a map that you're working on. Or if you're in, as Jeff was talking about, if there's a question about this element in this map, you can initiate a discussion about this element and its connections and put a link in here to that particular discussion, and in the discussion a link back to this element, so that everything is cross-connected and people can find their way around. I mean, it's just, it has a set of possibilities that I just don't find anyplace else. So.
And Gene, do I still have? Okay, I still have it. I'm going to show really quick the Explore page. And to Gene's point, this still isn't as great as we'd like to get it in terms of having it be the really high quality maps that are all listed here. We'll continue to build this out and also make sure that people can search the full breadth of all the projects that are out there. You'll notice we keep talking about this idea of public projects, and so let me just take a second to mention what that is. Public meaning anyone can view it on the web, anyone can come in, see it, even hop in and participate in discussion. They can't edit the map. You as the project owner get to choose who can actually be a part of your map as a collaborator or a manager. And so the way that we've built Kumu and kind of our give back to the community to really create this robust community around systems thinking in relationships is all the public projects are always completely free of charge. So it is a fully featured project. Like it's everything that anyone would pay like full bore for on a private project. You always get that for free for public. We're going to do that forever. The private projects, meaning you get to choose who can see it, that starts at kind of like a $29 a month rate, and so you can see all that on the homepage on the pricing. But this essentially is the Explore for all of the different public projects. And so it's done right now just based on kind of recent voting that happens. You'll see when you're on the Discuss page, you can actually get to a profile page for a given project and like it or like users. And so right now this is pulling from that. And as we continue, we'll have a couple other ways that you can browse all the different maps here. But if you'd like to see some examples of what other people are doing, you can go to kumu.io explore and browse through some of these. Sometimes some test maps and dummy maps are making it into this page right now, and so we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. But it's at least a good thing to check every once in a while if you're just curious about how other people are using it.
There aren't any other questions at the moment, Jeff.
Okay.
And I don't have anything else to add. unless there are some other questions. Just because this session is scheduled for an hour doesn't mean it needs to be an hour.
Perfect. So please everyone know I'm always here available, whether you have questions about Kumu, if you have ideas, if you're frustrated by a given feature and have recommendations for how we can change it, all of that, I'm happy to. Gene, if you want to make sure just people have my email address, and we can continue to go from there. And if people are hopping in and trying to do mapping and they have questions or want a bit more of kind of a detailed walkthrough, I'm happy to record a couple of videos that go even in more depth than that causal loop mapping kind of how-to video that was just posted.
If you put @Jeff in any post, in any discussion in Kumu, he will get it.
Exactly.
Like this one right here, @Jeff. Yes. It's a feature of the discussion. If there's somebody that you know that has a Kumu account but might not be following this particular discussion, if you put an @ in their username, Kumu will end up copying them on that post. So @Jeff gets to Jeff wherever you happen to put it. Okay.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Gene. Thank everyone
Thank you
for
very much.
being on here. It's been a pleasure. So,
and as I said, I'll go ahead and post this video and all of the links on the Kumu mapping entry point right here. And thank you very much, all. If you have any questions after this, just go ahead and post them to the discussion associated with this segment. Okay. Have a great day, people.
thank you, Gene. Thanks, everyone.